There is a river that flows through every moment of your life. You cannot see it with your eyes, you cannot touch it with your hands, but it shapes everything you are, everything you have, and everything you will become. This river, it moves in only one direction. It never stops. It never sleeps. And every choice you make either harnesses its power or surrenders to its current. This river is time. And tonight we gather here, not as students of finance, not as disciples of economics, but as witnesses to one of the most profound truths ever discovered about human existence. A truth that separates those who build empires from those who remain trapped in cycles of struggle. A truth that explains why the janitor who starts investing at 25 retires wealthier than the surgeon who starts at 45. A truth that reveals why patience is not just a virtue. It is the hidden architecture of all prosperity. We call this truth the time value of money. But do not be deceived by its mathematical simplicity. Do not reduce it to formulas scrawled on blackboards or spreadsheets glowing on screens, because what we are about to explore together transcends the mere mechanics of compound interest. What we are about to discover is a map of consciousness itself, a revelation about how the human mind perceives value, measures worth, and navigates the invisible currents of possibility that flow between this moment and every future we might inhabit. Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the base of two mountains. One mountain is called intelligence. It towers above you, magnificent and imposing, its peak wreathed in clouds, its slopes steep and forbidding. From childhood, you have been taught to worship this mountain. Climb it, they said, reach its summit, and all treasures will be yours. So you studied, you memorized, you tested and proved and achieved, and perhaps you did reach great heights. Perhaps you earned degrees, mastered skills, collected accolades like precious stones. But then you noticed the second mountain. This one has a different name. It is called time. And here is what strikes you as strange. This mountain does not require you to climb at all. Instead, it invites you to plant a seed at its base. Just one seed. Nothing more. And then, here is the mystery. If you simply walk away and let that seed rest in the soil, something impossible begins to happen. That seed grows. It becomes a sapling. The sapling becomes a tree. And the tree, given enough seasons, becomes a forest that sprawls across the entire mountainside, generating fruit, providing shelter, creating an ecosystem of abundance that requires no further effort from you. This is not metaphor. This is mathematics. This is reality. This is the fundamental asymmetry between intellectual capacity and temporal advantage, between what you know and when you begin. Tonight, over the next 2 hours, we will walk together through the architecture of this truth. We will trace its origins in the human psyche and the mathematical universe. We will confront the psychological barriers that blind us to its power. We will witness the transformation that occurs when a mind finally grasps what it means to think in time rather than in moments. And we will emerge, if we are willing to truly see, with a recalibrated understanding of value itself. Because here is what most people never comprehend. Here is what separates those who accumulate wealth from those who merely earn income. Here is the secret hidden in plain sight. Money is not a thing. Money is not an object you possess. Money is a river flowing through time, and its value is not determined by the number on a bill or in an account. Its value is determined by when it exists in your hands and what that timing allows it to become. $1 today is not equal to $1 tomorrow. This statement sounds simple, but embedded within it is a revolution in consciousness. Because if you truly absorb this truth, if you let it penetrate not just your intellect but your intuition, your habits, your relationship with every choice you make, you will never see the world the same way again. Consider the young man who stands at the threshold of adulthood. He has 2 paths before him. In one future, he saves $100 every month starting today, at age 25. In another future, he waits. He spends his 20s enjoying life, telling himself there will be time later. At 35, having finally achieved a higher income, he begins saving $300 per month, 3 times what he would have saved a decade earlier. Common sense suggests the second path leads to greater wealth. After all, he is saving more. But common sense does not understand time. By age 65, the man who started at 25 with smaller contributions has accumulated over $300,000. The man who started at 35, despite contributing more money overall, has barely reached 200,000. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is not discipline. The difference is not even the total amount contributed. The difference is time. The difference is that invisible river that turned modest deposits into compounding miracles while the second man was still deciding whether to begin. This example is not designed to shame those who started late. It is designed to awaken something deeper, a recognition that time is not neutral. Time is not merely a backdrop against which financial decisions play out. Time is an active force. Time is a multiplier. Time is the difference between seeds and forests, between potential and manifestation, between the life you imagine and the life you inhabit. And here is where the psychology becomes fascinating, because even when people understand this intellectually, even when they can recite the formulas and calculate the returns, they still fail to act. Why? What invisible force prevents the human mind from aligning its behavior with its knowledge? What psychological barrier stands between understanding and embodiment? The answer lies in how we experience time itself. We are not rational creatures calculating optimal strategies. We are feeling beings navigating an emotional landscape where the present moment pulses with vivid intensity while the future remains a ghostly abstraction. Neuroscience reveals that when we imagine our future selves, our brains show activation patterns similar to when we think about strangers. The person you will be in 30 years feels less real than the stranger sitting next to you on a train. And so we sacrifice that stranger's well-being for our present comfort, not out of cruelty, but out of cognitive architecture. This is the first barrier we must dissolve, the illusion that present you and future you are separate beings competing for resources. The truth is that there is only one you moving through time, and every financial decision is not a transaction with an external future, but a gift you give yourself across the dimension of duration. But let us go deeper still. Let us ask the question that pulses beneath all of this. Why does time create value? What is actually happening when money grows across years and decades? Is it merely a mathematical trick, a clever mechanism devised by bankers and economists? Or is there something more fundamental at work, something that reveals a hidden structure of reality itself? The answer takes us beyond finance into philosophy, into the nature of potential and actualization, into the relationship between being and becoming. Because when you deposit money and it earns interest, what is actually occurring is this. You are converting present certainty into future possibility. You are trading the bird in your hand for the promise of a flock in the bush. And you are betting that time is not empty, that it is not merely duration, but rather a field of generative potential where capital meets opportunity and produces offspring. This is why all economic growth depends on the fundamental human capacity to delay gratification, to project consciousness forward in time, to care about a self we have not yet become. Animals cannot do this. They consume everything immediately because they experience only now. But humans, we are the species that plants orchards we will not live to harvest, builds cathedrals we will not see completed, invests in futures we can only imagine. And this capacity, this uniquely human relationship with time, is the foundation not just of personal wealth, but of civilization itself. So as we begin this journey together, I want you to release whatever assumptions you brought with you about money and mathematics. What we are exploring is far more primal. We are investigating the relationship between consciousness and temporality. We are examining how minds navigate the space between present and future. We are uncovering the psychological, philosophical, and emotional dimensions of a truth that appears simple, but contains within it the entire architecture of human prosperity. Over the next hours, you will see the world of finance transformed into a landscape of meaning. You will understand why the tortoise beats the hare not through speed but through starting. You will grasp why the most intelligent people often remain poor, while those with average intellects build fortunes. You will learn to think in decades rather than days, to feel the weight of compound growth in your bones, to perceive time not as an enemy stealing your youth, but as an ally amplifying your choices. And perhaps most importantly, you will confront the question that defines every human life. What am I doing with my time? Because in the end, the time value of money is not about money at all. It is about the value of time itself, and how you choose to spend the only irreplaceable resource you truly possess. The river is flowing. It flows whether you notice or not, whether you wade in or stand on the shore, whether you build bridges across it or let it carry you wherever it wills. But once you see it, once you truly see the current that shapes all futures, you cannot unsee it. And in that seeing, everything changes. Let us begin. In the beginning, there was only now. Picture our ancestors 50,000 years ago, moving through grasslands beneath an indifferent sun. They knew hunger and satiation, danger and safety, exhaustion and rest. But tomorrow? Tomorrow was not a concept. Tomorrow was barely a whisper in the neural architecture of their awakening minds. They lived in what cognitive scientists call the eternal present, a consciousness so tethered to immediate sensation that abstract futures held no weight, carried no value, inspired no sacrifice. And yet something was stirring, something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth, because unlike every other creature that had ever drawn breath, humans were developing a strange new capacity, the ability to imagine themselves in a time that did not yet exist, to project their consciousness forward like a beam of light into darkness and see themselves still existing, still needing, still capable of suffering or flourishing. This was the birth of temporal consciousness, and with it came the birth of value itself. You see, value is not an inherent property of objects. Value is a judgment made by minds that can compare states across time. The berry in your hand has value not because of its molecular composition, but because you can imagine a future self experiencing hunger and know that consuming it now will alleviate that future pain. This requires a cognitive revolution, the capacity to hold multiple temporal states in awareness simultaneously and assign different weights to each based on probability, urgency, and desire. But here is where it becomes profound. Once humans could imagine tomorrow, they faced an immediate problem, a problem that would define the entire trajectory of civilization. What should I do with this surplus? If I have gathered more food than I need today, do I consume it all in celebration, or do I store some for a future that may or may not arrive? And more importantly, how do I compare the certain pleasure of immediate consumption with the uncertain benefit of future security? This is the primordial version of the question we still face every time we decide whether to spend or save, consume or invest, live for today or prepare for tomorrow. And embedded in this question is the fundamental psychology of the time value of money, long before money itself existed. The first humans to master delayed gratification gained an evolutionary advantage. While others feasted and starved in cycles, those who could override immediate impulses and provision for future scarcity survived winters, droughts, and famines. They lived longer, had more offspring, passed their genes forward. And so natural selection began to favor minds that could value the future almost as much as the present, but never quite as much. Because a mind that values the future more than the present never acts, never consumes, never lives. It dies clutching its savings, having never converted potential into experience. This is the delicate balance evolution etched into your neurobiology. The present must feel more real, more urgent, more valuable than the future, or you would never eat, never sleep, never tend to your immediate needs. But the future must still carry enough weight to motivate preparation, planning, and sacrifice. And the ratio between these two valuations, between present and future, determines almost everything about how you navigate the economic world. Fast forward thousands of years, agriculture emerges. And with agriculture comes surplus of a new kind, not just food for next week, but grain that can last months, seeds that can be planted, animals that can be bred. Suddenly humans are not just storing for survival, they are investing. They are taking present resources and transforming them into future abundance through the mechanism of biological growth. A farmer plants 10 seeds and harvests 100. This is not magic. This is the discovery that time plus capital plus the right conditions equals multiplication. The farmer who eats all his seeds starves next year. The farmer who plants them all starves this year. The optimal strategy requires splitting resources between present consumption and future investment, a calculation that requires valuing both time frames simultaneously. And then comes the most revolutionary development in human history, the invention of money. Money is often misunderstood as merely a medium of exchange, a convenient substitute for barter. But money is something far more profound. Money is crystallized time. It is the ability to convert present effort into a token that stores value across temporal distance, allowing you to work today and consume tomorrow, to save now and spend later, to translate labor into a form that transcends the moment of its creation. Before money, if you wanted to consume in the future, you had to store actual goods, grain, livestock, tools. But goods decay, grain molds, animals die, tools rust. The value leaked away across time like water through cupped hands. Money solved this problem. It created a stable medium that could preserve value indefinitely, allowing humans to save, accumulate, and plan across timescales previously impossible. But with money came a new problem. If I give you 10 coins today with the promise that you will return them next year, why would you agree? What incentive do I have to wait? And more importantly, what are those coins actually worth to me next year compared to today? If I need them now to buy food, to heal sickness, to seize an opportunity, then coins next year are useless. They cannot feed my present hunger or cure my present disease. I might die before next year arrives. The whole promise might evaporate into nothing. This is where interest emerges, not as greed, not as exploitation, but as a rational response to the time value of money. If you want to borrow my 10 coins and return them next year, you must give me back more than 10. Not because I am cruel, but because those 10 coins today are worth more to me than 10 coins next year. The interest compensates me for the risk I take, the alternative opportunities I sacrifice, and the fundamental psychological reality that present goods are more valuable than future goods of identical quantity. The ancient Babylonians understood this 4,000 years ago. They had elaborate systems of interest rates for loans of grain, silver, and other commodities. The Code of Hammurabi specified maximum interest rates to prevent exploitation while acknowledging that interest itself was legitimate, necessary, even natural. Why? Because they recognized that time is not free. Time is a resource. Time is a container for possibility, and moving value across time requires compensation. But here is what they also understood, what modern minds often forget. Interest works in both directions. If borrowing money requires paying interest because present is more valuable than future, then lending money earns interest for the exact same reason. When you save, when you invest, when you delay consumption, you are performing an act of temporal arbitrage. You are saying, I value the future version of this money more than its present form, even though I know the present is psychologically more vivid. And the reward for this act of will, this override of biological programming, is compound growth. Let me take you deeper into the mathematics of this, not as dry calculation but as revelation. When you invest $100 at 10% annual interest, you do not simply earn $10 per year. That would be linear growth, simple interest, addition. But reality is stranger than that, because the interest you earn in year 1 itself begins earning interest in year 2. And the interest from years 1 and 2 both earn interest in year 3. This is compound growth. This is exponential mathematics. This is why Einstein supposedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, though whether he actually said this is less important than the truth it expresses. Compound interest means that growth accelerates, the curve steepens. The snowball rolling down the mountain gathers more snow with each rotation, becoming an avalanche. Your $100 becomes $110 in year 1. But in year 2, it becomes $121, not $120. That extra dollar is the interest on your interest. It seems trivial, but extend this across decades, and the trivial becomes transformative. After 10 years, your $100 becomes approximately $260. After 20 years, $670. After 30 years, $1,700. After 40 years, $4,500. Notice what happens here. The growth in the first decade is $160. The growth in the fourth decade is $3,100. Same interest rate, same annual process. But the later years produce growth that dwarfs the early years, not because the conditions changed, but because time had more material to work with. This is why starting early matters more than contributing more. This is why the young person with modest means who begins today will outpace the high earner who starts tomorrow. Because compound interest is not interested in your intelligence, your credentials, your status, or your intentions. It is interested only in time and consistency. Give it those two things, and it will work miracles. Deny it those things, and no amount of genius can compensate. But we must ask, why does compound interest exist at all? Why does the universe allow this multiplication? The answer lies in the nature of capital itself. Capital is not static. Capital is potential. When you lend money or invest in a business or buy a productive asset, that capital goes to work. It funds innovation, creates products, employs labor, generates value that did not previously exist. The interest you earn is your share of that newly created value. It is not extracted from thin air or stolen from someone else's pocket. It is the dividend of growth, the reward for enabling productivity, the echo of value creation rippling back to you across time. This is why interest rates vary, why safe government bonds earn 3% while risky startups might promise 30%. The rate reflects the probability of growth, the level of risk, the scarcity of capital, and the alternative uses of money. High interest rates signal either high risk or high potential. Low interest rates signal safety or abundance. And zero or negative interest rates signal something truly strange, economies where people value future security so much that they will pay to preserve capital, where the psychology of fear overwhelms the mathematics of growth. But let us return to the human element. Because all of this mathematics, all of this economic theory, rests on a foundation of psychology. And the psychology is this. Most people cannot feel compound interest. They can calculate it, they can graph it, they can understand it intellectually, but they cannot feel it in their bones the way they feel hunger or fatigue or desire, and what we cannot feel, we do not adequately respect. Psychologists have documented what they call hyperbolic discounting, the tendency to prefer smaller rewards sooner over larger rewards later, and to do so in ways that violate rational choice theory. If I offer you $50 today or $100 in a year, you might choose the 50. That implies you discount future value by at least 50% annually. But if I offer you $50 in 5 years or $100 in 6 years, you will probably choose the 100. The absolute time delay is identical, 1 year. But when both options are pushed into the future, your preference reverses. This inconsistency reveals that we do not have a stable discount rate. We have a psychological bias toward the present that diminishes as both options recede into abstract futurity. This is not a bug in human cognition. This is a feature shaped by evolution. For most of human history, waiting a year for doubled resources made no sense. You might die. The resources might disappear. The future was too uncertain to justify sacrifice. Better to take what you can now and survive. Those who delayed gratification excessively left fewer descendants than those who consumed opportunistically. But in the modern world, this ancient programming sabotages our prosperity. Because now we live in stable societies with functioning institutions, predictable futures, and investment vehicles that reliably grow wealth across decades. The optimal strategy has reversed. Now, delaying gratification is not a luxury for the paranoid. It is the rational path to abundance. But our brains have not caught up. We still carry Stone Age psychology in an information age economy. And this mismatch creates most of the financial suffering we see around us. Think about debt. Credit cards that charge 20% annual interest while savings accounts pay 1%. Logically, anyone who understands the time value of money should never carry credit card debt while having spare cash. The mathematics is unambiguous. You lose 19% by doing so. Yet millions of people maintain this exact pattern. Why? Because the future penalty feels abstract, while the present pleasure feels concrete. The new television today is vivid and desirable. The compounding interest next year is invisible and easily dismissed. This is the tragedy. This is the gap between knowledge and wisdom. This is why financial literacy alone does not solve financial problems. Because the problem is not knowledge. The problem is that knowing something intellectually does not automatically translate into feeling it viscerally, and feelings drive behavior far more than facts. So the question becomes, how do we bridge this gap? How do we make the future real enough to compete with the present? How do we train our emotional systems to value compound growth with the same intensity we value immediate consumption? The answer begins with storytelling, with imagination. With the same capacity that first allowed humans to value tomorrow, the ability to vividly picture yourself in a future scenario and feel the emotions that scenario would generate. This is why the most effective financial advisors do not show you spreadsheets and graphs. They help you visualize specific futures. What will your life look like at 65 if you save versus if you do not? Can you see yourself in that retirement? Feel the security or the anxiety? Taste the freedom or the dependence? When the future becomes concrete, when it acquires emotional texture and narrative detail, it begins to compete with the present on equal terms. And when that happens, behavior shifts. Not through willpower, not through discipline, but through a realignment of values, a reweighting of temporal worth that makes delayed gratification feel not like sacrifice but like obvious self-interest. This is the psychological foundation we must build upon. This is the ancient human capacity we must awaken from its evolutionary slumber. The ability to see tomorrow with the clarity we see today. The willingness to plant trees whose shade we may never enjoy. The wisdom to know that the person we will become is not a stranger to sacrifice for, but our own self, distributed across time, deserving of love and care from our present form. And once this foundation is set, once the psychology aligns with the mathematics, something remarkable happens. Saving stops feeling like deprivation. Investing stops feeling like gambling. And compound interest stops being an abstract concept and becomes a lived experience, a partnership with time itself, where your past self sends gifts forward to your future self, and your future self looks back with gratitude at the choices you made when the outcome was still uncertain. This is the origin. This is how humans learned to see tomorrow and discovered that tomorrow, when properly cultivated, could be infinitely more abundant than today. Now we must confront the barriers that prevent most people from acting on this knowledge, the psychological conflicts, the emotional traps, the cognitive distortions that make the obvious path seem impossible to walk. That is where we turn next. There is a paradox at the heart of the human condition. We know what is good for us, yet we do not do it. We understand the consequences of our choices, yet we make the same mistakes repeatedly. We have access to information that previous generations could only dream of, yet we remain trapped in patterns of behavior that sabotage our own futures. Nowhere is this paradox more visible than in our relationship with money and time. You know you should save. You know compound interest works. You know that starting early matters. You have seen the charts, read the books, heard the advice, and yet the savings account remains empty. The credit cards remain full. The retirement contributions remain postponed. Month after month, year after year, the gap widens between what you know and what you do. And the question that haunts you in quiet moments is not what to do, but why you cannot seem to do it. This is the struggle we must now confront. Not the mathematics of compound interest, but the psychology of resistance. Not the theory of wealth accumulation, but the emotional warfare that unfolds every time you try to prioritize your future over your present. Because here is the truth that no financial advisor wants to admit. The problem is not information. The problem is transformation, and transformation requires confronting parts of yourself that you would rather not see. Let us begin with the most fundamental conflict, the war between your present self and your future self. These are not abstract concepts. They are real psychological entities that neuroscience can now observe and measure. When you imagine yourself in 10 years, your brain shows reduced activity in regions associated with self-reference. The you of the future is processed more like a stranger than like yourself. And here is the devastating implication. You do not feel the same moral obligation to help a stranger that you feel to help yourself. When you spend money today that you should save for tomorrow, you are not actually stealing from yourself. You are stealing from a different person. Someone who shares your name and will inhabit your body, but who feels psychologically distant, almost fictional. And this distance grants permission. You would never take money from your child's college fund to buy a new gadget, but taking from your own retirement? That feels different. That feels acceptable. Because the 65-year-old version of you is not your child. It is barely you at all. This temporal discontinuity of self is the first barrier, and overcoming it requires an act of radical imagination. You must close the psychological distance. You must make future you as real as present you. Some researchers have experimented with virtual reality, showing people aged simulations of their own faces. When participants see themselves as they will look at retirement, they save significantly more. Why? Because the future self suddenly becomes concrete, specific, undeniable. Not an abstraction, but a person with a face, with needs, with a life that depends on the choices you make today. But even if you manage to care about your future self, you face the second conflict, the tyranny of the present. Right now is loud. Right now is vivid. Right now screams with urgency. Your friend is getting married and you need a gift. Your car broke down and you need repairs. Your child wants to join the soccer team and you need to pay fees. The present arrives wearing 1,000 disguises, each one reasonable, each one justifiable, each one convincing you that this time, just this once, you must prioritize immediacy over futurity. And you are not wrong. The present matters. Ignoring present needs in service of future wealth is not virtue but pathology. The miser who refuses to live, who denies himself basic comforts and experiences, who reaches retirement with a fortune but no memories. This is not the goal. The goal is balance. The goal is to honor both present and future, to allocate resources between enjoyment and investment, to live today while preparing for tomorrow. But here is where the conflict intensifies. How much is enough for today? Where is the line between reasonable present comfort and excessive consumption? And who gets to decide? Because your present self will always have compelling arguments for why this expense, this purchase, this indulgence is necessary. Your present self is the lawyer defending its own interests, and it is very, very good at its job. Meanwhile, your future self cannot speak, cannot advocate, cannot plead its case. It exists only as a whisper of possibility, a ghost haunting the edges of your awareness, easily ignored in the noise and urgency of now. And so the present self wins, not because it is right, but because it is present. And the future self loses, not because it is wrong, but because it is absent. This is the second barrier, the asymmetry of voice. The present screams while the future whispers. And overcoming this requires developing what psychologists call temporal empathy, the capacity to feel concern for your own future emotions with the same intensity you feel present emotions. This is not natural. This must be cultivated. This is a skill, not an instinct. But let us go deeper still, because there is a third conflict more insidious than the first two combined. It is the conflict between action and identity. Who are you? Are you someone who saves, who invests, who plans? Or are you someone who lives spontaneously, who trusts the universe, who believes everything will work out? These questions are not about behavior. They are about the story you tell about yourself. And humans are deeply committed to maintaining consistent narratives of identity, even when those narratives are self-destructive. If you see yourself as a saver, then saving feels natural, effortless, aligned with who you are. But if you see yourself as not good with money, or not a numbers person, or someone who lives for today, then any attempt to save feels like a betrayal of your true self. It creates cognitive dissonance. It triggers the discomfort of acting out of character. And so your psyche mobilizes defenses. It generates rationalizations, excuses, justifications, anything to protect the coherence of your self-story. This is why telling someone, just save more, rarely works. Because you are not asking them to change a behavior. You are asking them to change their identity. And identity is the most defended territory in the human psyche. People will endure astonishing suffering to maintain a consistent self-concept. They will sabotage opportunities, reject help, cling to destructive patterns, all to avoid the psychological vertigo of becoming someone they do not recognize. The path through this barrier is not willpower. It is narrative reconstruction. It is learning to tell a new story about who you are. A story where saving is not betrayal but evolution, where investing is not out of character but the next chapter of your becoming. This requires grief. You must mourn the old identity before you can inhabit the new one. You must acknowledge what you are leaving behind, thank it for its service, and consciously choose to evolve. But even if you navigate these three conflicts successfully, even if you make your future self real, give it a voice and align your identity with the behaviors you know serve you, you still face a fourth barrier, perhaps the most challenging of all. You face the reality of trade-offs, because every financial decision is ultimately a choice about what you value most, and there are no perfect choices. Every option forecloses other options. Every path not taken haunts the path you walk. Should you save aggressively for retirement, even if it means denying your children experiences and opportunities they will never get back? Should you invest in property, even if it means staying in a location you do not love? Should you maintain financial discipline, even if it strains your relationships with friends and family who spend more freely? These questions have no universal answers. They depend on your values, your circumstances, your tolerance for risk and regret, and here is what makes them psychologically treacherous. Whatever you choose, you will wonder about the alternative. This is the curse of consciousness. You cannot help but imagine the parallel life you might have lived if you had chosen differently. And in those imagined lives, the grass often looks greener, the path clearer, the outcome more satisfying. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking, and it is both a source of wisdom and a generator of endless torment. The antidote is not to stop imagining alternatives, but to make peace with uncertainty. To recognize that perfect information is impossible, optimal choices are mythical, and regret is inevitable. What matters is not making the best choice, but making a choice that aligns with your values and then committing to it fully, trusting that the wisdom was in the choosing itself, not in the outcome. But wait, there is yet another dimension to this conflict. Because your relationship with money is never only about money. It is about power, security, identity, freedom, and meaning. Money is the medium through which we navigate the social world, signal our status, assert our autonomy, and measure our worth. And every culture, every family, every peer group has unspoken rules about how money should be handled. Spend too freely, and you are irresponsible. Save too much, and you are miserly. Invest successfully, and you are lucky or privileged. Struggle financially, and you are lazy or foolish. The judgments are relentless, contradictory, and internalized. So when you try to change your financial behavior, you are not just fighting your own impulses. You are fighting the voices of everyone who ever told you what money means, what it says about you, what you owe to others versus what you owe to yourself. You are fighting the social scripts that define appropriate consumption, acceptable sacrifice, legitimate aspiration. You are fighting the guilt of having more than your parents, the shame of having less than your peers, the anxiety of never feeling it is enough. This is the fifth barrier, the social and psychological complexity of money as symbol. And navigating it requires what depth psychology calls individuation, the process of discovering your own values beneath the layers of inherited belief. You must ask, what do I actually want money for? Not what society says I should want. Not what advertising convinces me to desire. But what would genuinely improve my life, align with my deepest values, and serve the person I am becoming? For some, the answer is freedom. Money as liberation from dependence, from unwanted labor, from circumstances that constrain possibility. For others, it is security. Money as protection against chaos, uncertainty, and the vulnerability of need. For others still, it is impact. Money as tool for creating change, supporting causes, leaving a legacy. There is no correct answer. But without clarity about your own answer, you will forever be blown about by competing pressures, unable to commit to any financial strategy because you do not know what you are actually optimizing for. And now we arrive at perhaps the deepest conflict of all, the collision between human time and cosmic time. Because while compound interest works miracles across decades, decades are a significant fraction of a human life. If you start saving at 30 for retirement at 65, you are committing to a strategy that will occupy 35 years, more than half your adult life. That is not a short-term sacrifice. That is an existential commitment. And it raises the most uncomfortable question of all. What if I die before I get there? This is not paranoia. This is statistics. Some people do die before retirement. Some people save diligently for futures they never inhabit. And while statistically the odds are in your favor, psychologically the fear is real. The fear that you will spend your prime years denying yourself for a future that never arrives. The fear that you will reach the end of your life and realize you were so busy preparing to live that you forgot to actually live. This fear is legitimate. It deserves respect, not dismissal. And it points to a truth that transcends finance, that life is not just preparation. Life is also participation. You must live now even as you prepare for later. You must find the balance between being and becoming, between enjoying the present and investing in the future. And that balance is not a formula. It is a constant negotiation, an ongoing dialogue between different aspects of yourself, each with legitimate needs and concerns. The path through this conflict is not to deny present enjoyment, but to reframe what enjoyment means, to recognize that the deepest pleasures often cost little, that relationships, creativity, growth, meaning, and beauty are available regardless of budget, that you can live richly even while spending modestly. This is not about sacrifice. This is about sophistication, developing tastes that align with sustainable lifestyles, values that money cannot corrupt, sources of joy that compound interest cannot amplify because they were never about money to begin with. And finally, we must confront the barrier that stops most people before they even begin, the illusion that it is too late. You tell yourself, I am already 35, already 40, already 50. I should have started decades ago. The opportunity has passed. The power of compound interest belongs to those who began in their 20s, and I am not among them. What is the point of starting now? This thought is a trap, a lie disguised as wisdom, a permission slip to give up disguised as realistic assessment, because here is the truth. The best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And while you will never recapture the advantage of those lost decades, you can prevent further loss. Every day you delay compounds not just missed gains, but mounting disadvantage. Starting late is not ideal, but it is infinitely better than never starting at all. Moreover, focusing on what you lost obscures what you still have: time. If you are 40 and expect to live to 80, you have 40 years. 40 years is enough for compound interest to work substantial magic. Will you accumulate as much as someone who started at 20? No. But you will accumulate vastly more than someone who never started at all. And perhaps more importantly, you will experience the psychological transformation that comes from aligning your behavior with your long-term interests. You will become someone who saves, who invests, who plans, and that identity shift has value beyond any dollar amount. This is the landscape of conflict. This is the inner war that determines financial outcomes far more than interest rates or market performance. This is why two people with identical incomes end up in radically different places, not because one is smarter, but because one navigated these psychological barriers successfully while the other remained trapped. And the question now is, how do we win this war? Not with willpower, which depletes, not with discipline, which cracks, but with something deeper and more sustainable, with integration, with wholeness, with a transformation that does not suppress your desires, but realigns them, that does not fight your nature, but evolves it, that does not force you to become someone you are not, but helps you become who you truly are beneath the conditioning and confusion. That transformation, that is what we explore next. There is a moment in every transformation when knowledge becomes wisdom, when the intellectual understanding you have carried like dead weight suddenly ignites into lived experience, when the gap between knowing and doing collapses not through effort but through shift, a reorganization of consciousness so complete that your previous way of being becomes impossible to maintain. This is not about learning more facts. This is about seeing differently. And what you must learn to see is time itself, not as a dimension you move through passively, but as a medium you shape actively, not as something that happens to you, but as something you collaborate with, not as an enemy stealing your youth, but as a partner amplifying your choices. The first insight that catalyzes this transformation is deceptively simple. You already understand compound interest in domains unrelated to money. You have always understood it. You simply never generalized the principle. Think about fitness. If you exercise once, you gain nothing visible. If you exercise daily for a week, you gain almost nothing. But if you exercise consistently for 6 months, a year, 5 years, you become a different person. The early workouts seemed to produce no result, but they were not wasted. They were accumulating. They were laying foundations. They were participating in a compound process where small, consistent efforts create exponential change over time. Think about relationships. A single conversation with a friend creates a small bond, but years of conversations, thousands of small moments of presence and care, that creates love, trust, history, the kind of connection that defines a life. No single moment felt transformative, but the accumulation was everything. Think about learning. Reading one book teaches you something. Reading 100 books in the same field does not teach you 100 times more. It teaches you 1,000 times more, because each book builds on the previous ones, creates new connections, deepens understanding in ways that compound across the network of knowledge you have constructed. You already live in a world of compound processes. Your entire life is shaped by them. The insight is recognizing that money is not an exception to this pattern, but an instance of it. When you save and invest, you are not doing something foreign to human experience. You are applying a principle you already understand intimately to a new domain. And once you see this, once you recognize saving as simply another form of compound growth you already value in other areas, the psychological resistance begins to dissolve. But let us go deeper. Because the real transformation requires understanding not just that time creates value, but why it creates value. And the answer returns us to the nature of potential. Every system contains more possibility than it currently expresses. A seed is not just a seed. It is a tree, a forest, an ecosystem. But it can only become those things if given time and the right conditions. Money is the same. $100 is not just $100. It is 1,000 possible futures, depending on what time and strategy allow it to become. When you save money, you are not reducing your present to enlarge your future. You are converting the merely actual into the potentially vast. You are saying, this money in my hand is one thing, but this money given time to grow is many things, and I choose the many over the one because I can see through time in a way that most people cannot. This is not sacrifice. This is vision. This is the ability to perceive what others miss, that present and future are not competitors, but collaborators, that the seed and the tree are the same entity at different stages of development, that your choice is not between present pleasure and future security, but between one-dimensional living and four-dimensional living that spans time as well as space. Once you grasp this, once you feel it in your bones, the psychological warfare ends. You stop feeling deprived when you save because you do not experience it as giving something up. You experience it as transforming it, as setting it in motion, as activating its latent potential. And this feels good. Not in the cheap way immediate consumption feels good, but in the deep way meaningful action feels good. The sense of aligning with reality, of working with universal principles rather than against them, of becoming competent at the game of being human across time. This leads to the second insight, that starting is the only action that matters. Not starting big, not starting perfectly, just starting. Because compound interest does not care about the size of your initial deposit. It cares about duration. Give it time, and it will work with whatever you provide. Start with $10 a month if that is all you have. Start with $50. Start with whatever amount feels sustainable rather than heroic, because heroic efforts collapse. Sustainable efforts compound. Too many people wait to start until they can start properly, until they have a significant sum, until they understand everything, until conditions are ideal. But this is perfectionism disguised as wisdom. This is fear disguised as prudence. The truth is that starting badly is infinitely better than not starting at all. Because once you start, you enter a new relationship with time. You become someone who saves. And identity shapes behavior far more than behavior shapes identity. When you make your first investment, something shifts. You begin checking performance. You become aware of market movements. You start learning about asset allocation, risk management, diversification. Not because someone forced you, but because you now have skin in the game. You have activated your own attention and curiosity. And this psychological shift, this movement from observer to participant, changes everything. Moreover, starting small allows you to fail small. And you will fail. You will make mistakes. You will invest in something that declines. You will panic and sell low. You will miss opportunities and chase losses. This is not a possibility. This is a certainty. Everyone who succeeds financially has a graveyard of failures behind them. The difference is that those who start early and small make their mistakes when the stakes are low. They pay for their education with hundreds or thousands of dollars rather than tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. They develop wisdom while the cost of ignorance is still manageable. This brings us to the third insight, that patience is not passive. Patience is the most active force in wealth creation. It is not sitting back and hoping. It is maintaining strategy in the face of volatility. It is refusing to react when every instinct screams to act. It is trusting the process when results are invisible. And this requires more psychological strength than almost any other human activity. Think about what happens during a market crash. Your portfolio drops 30% in 3 months. Every day you check, you have lost more. Every news headline predicts further doom. Your primitive brain is screaming danger, warning you to cut losses, to save what is left. And most people listen to that voice. They sell at the bottom, crystallizing losses that would have been temporary, abandoning strategy at precisely the moment when strategy matters most. But the investor who understands compound growth knows that crashes are not catastrophes. They are opportunities. Because when prices are low, your regular contributions buy more shares. When the market recovers, and it always recovers, given enough time, those extra shares purchased during the crisis produce outsized gains. The people who get wealthy are not those who avoid crashes. They are those who stay invested through crashes, who maintain contributions when it feels most terrifying to do so, who trust the long-term pattern more than the short-term chaos. This is patience as active force. This is courage masquerading as inaction. And it separates those who benefit from compound growth from those who merely understand it intellectually. Because you can know the mathematics perfectly and still sabotage yourself through emotional reaction. The work is not intellectual. The work is emotional. The work is developing the psychological capacity to watch your portfolio decline and do nothing, to see opportunity where others see disaster, to maintain your relationship with future. You, even when present, you is terrified. The fourth insight is that wealth creation is not about income, but about allocation. You can earn $1 million a year and end up broke. You can earn $50,000 a year and retire a millionaire. The difference is not how much enters your life, but how much you keep and deploy. This seems obvious, yet most people operate on the inverse assumption, that if only they earned more, everything would be fine. So they wait for the raise, the promotion, the inheritance. They delay starting until income increases. But income increasing without behavioral change produces only lifestyle inflation, not wealth accumulation. The truth is that your wealth is determined by one simple equation: what you earn minus what you spend invested over time. Of these 3 variables, the easiest to control is spending, and yet spending feels the hardest to change because it is entangled with identity, status, and psychological need. You spend not just to acquire things, but to signal who you are, to manage emotions, to fill voids, to participate in social rituals. The transformation requires disentangling spending from these psychological functions. It requires finding alternative ways to meet needs currently met through consumption. It requires questioning every expense not from a place of deprivation, but from curiosity. What am I actually getting from this? Is it serving me? Is there a better way to achieve the underlying goal? And gradually, through this process of conscious examination, spending aligns with values. You spend on what genuinely matters and stop spending on what merely habit or social pressure convinced you mattered. When this happens, when your spending reflects your authentic priorities rather than internalized scripts, something remarkable occurs. You need less. Not because you are depriving yourself, but because you have eliminated the unnecessary. And the gap between income and spending widens not through sacrifice, but through clarity. And that gap, invested consistently, is the foundation of all financial security. The fifth insight is that time in the market beats timing the market. This is a cliché in financial circles, but like most clichés, it became common because it captures a profound truth. People imagine that successful investing requires predicting the future, knowing when to buy and when to sell, outsmarting other investors through superior analysis. But this is fantasy. The evidence is overwhelming that even professional investors with advanced degrees, sophisticated models, and insider access rarely beat simple index funds over long periods. Why? Because the market is not a puzzle to solve. It is a complex adaptive system that incorporates information faster than any individual can react. By the time you notice a pattern, millions of others have already noticed it and traded on it, eliminating the advantage. The only edge that remains consistently exploitable is time. The advantage of staying invested through all conditions, of refusing to play the game of prediction, of trusting that productive capital compounds regardless of monthly fluctuations. This insight liberates you from a trap that ensnares many intelligent people. They believe their intelligence qualifies them to outsmart the market, so they study, analyze, trade frequently, and generate fees, taxes, and stress, while underperforming someone who simply invests in a diversified portfolio and ignores it. The irony is that the less you try to be clever, the better you do. The more you embrace simplicity, the more compound interest rewards you. Intelligence helps you understand this principle, but wisdom is required to actually follow it. The sixth insight is that your greatest asset is not money but human capital, your ability to earn. A 25-year-old with no savings but a valuable skill is far wealthier than a 50-year-old with significant savings but no earning capacity. Because the 25-year-old has decades of income ahead, decades of opportunity to convert labor into capital. Every investment you make in your own skills, knowledge, health, and reputation is an investment that compounds across your entire career. This reframes what it means to build wealth. It is not just about allocating capital. It is about developing yourself into someone whose labor is valuable, whose skills are scarce, whose reputation opens doors. And this development is itself a compound process. The skills you learn today enable you to learn more advanced skills tomorrow. The reputation you build through consistent quality work creates opportunities you could not access otherwise. The network you cultivate through genuine relationships becomes a source of information, collaboration, and support that multiplies your effectiveness. So when you are young, when financial capital is scarce, invest aggressively in human capital. Take the job that teaches you more, even if it pays less. Buy the course, attend the workshop, find the mentor. Live below your means not just to save money, but to fund your own development. Because the return on self-investment often exceeds any market return available. A skill that increases your income by 10% per year produces a lifetime of compound benefits that no mutual fund can match. The seventh insight is that financial independence is not a number, but a ratio. The ratio between your spending and your invested assets. When your assets generate enough passive income to cover your expenses, you are financially independent. Notice that this can be achieved either by increasing assets or by decreasing expenses. Most people focus exclusively on the first, but decreasing expenses is often faster, easier, and more within your control. If you spend $50,000 a year, you need roughly $1.25 million invested to be financially independent, assuming a 4% withdrawal rate. But if you can live well on $30,000 a year, you need only $750,000. That difference, the difference between needing to accumulate $1.25 million versus $750,000, could represent a decade of your life. A decade of freedom, of choice, of time reclaimed from labor you no longer wish to perform. This is why examining your relationship with consumption is not about austerity, but about agency. Every dollar you do not need to spend is a dollar that can work for you. Every expense you eliminate is a step closer to the ratio that grants independence. And independence, the ability to choose how you spend your time, to say no to work that drains you, to pursue projects that matter regardless of their economic return. This is the ultimate dividend of compound interest. Not luxury, not status, but freedom. The final insight is that none of this matters if you cannot transmit it to others. Wealth that dies with you is wasted potential. But wealth that funds your children's education, that supports causes you care about, that creates opportunities for others, that wealth multiplies across generations, creating compound effects not just financially, but socially, culturally, spiritually. You become a link in a chain that extends both backward to those who invested in you and forward to those you invest in. And your life becomes not just a personal journey, but a contribution to something larger than yourself. This is the transformation, not learning new facts, but reorganizing your consciousness around the reality of time, not acquiring discipline, but discovering motivation so deep that discipline becomes unnecessary, not sacrificing present for future, but recognizing that present and future are inseparable, that you are always living in both simultaneously, and that true wisdom is honoring both without collapsing either. When you achieve this, when you truly become someone who sees through time, the question is no longer, should I save, but how can I not? Because you have recognized that saving is not deprivation, but activation, not sacrifice, but transformation, not preparation for life, but life itself, lived in its full temporal dimension. And from this recognition, all else follows. The behaviors align, the choices clarify, the fear dissolves, and you begin simply, consistently, to do what you have always known you should do, not because you must, but because you finally see why you would want to. And that seeing, that is the only transformation that matters. We have walked a long road together, from the origins of temporal consciousness in human evolution to the mathematics of compound interest, from the psychological barriers that prevent action to the insights that enable transformation. And now we stand at the threshold, the moment where understanding must become practice, where ideas must become choices, where the knowledge you carry leaves this moment and enters the flow of your actual life. So let me ask you, what will you do with what you now know? Because that is the question this conversation has been preparing you to answer, not intellectually, but existentially, not someday, but now. Not in some hypothetical future when conditions are perfect, but in this imperfect present where you actually live. The river of time is flowing. It has been flowing throughout this entire speech, and every moment you delay is a moment compounding in the direction of your current trajectory rather than your intended destination. But here is what I want you to understand as you prepare to act. This is not about perfection. This is not about having everything figured out before you begin. This is about taking the first step, even if your legs are shaking, about planting the first seed, even if the soil looks uncertain, about making the first contribution, even if the amount feels laughably small. Because the power of compound interest is not in the size of your start, but in the fact of starting. And every day you wait, you are not waiting to start better. You are starting to fall behind. Time is not neutral. Time does not pause while you prepare. Time is making choices for you through your inaction, compounding the consequences of delay, and those consequences are not immediately visible, which is precisely what makes them dangerous. You can postpone saving for a year, 5 years, a decade, and nothing dramatic happens. The quality of your life does not suddenly collapse. You still wake up, go to work, pay your bills, experience pleasures and pains. The future remains abstract, distant, unreal. But then one day, maybe when you are 50, maybe when you are 60, the future becomes present. The person you were delaying for suddenly is you, and the question becomes unavoidable. Where is the wealth that time should have created? Where are the compound gains that patience should have delivered? And the answer, if you did not act, if you remained a spectator watching your own life rather than a participant shaping it, the answer is that they were never created, the seeds were never planted, the forest never grew. And now, with time's advantage lost, you face choices you never wanted to confront. This is not meant to generate fear. Fear is not a sustainable motivator. This is meant to generate clarity, clarity about what is at stake. Clarity about why action matters now, not eventually. Clarity about the difference between abstract understanding and embodied commitment. Because you can listen to this speech, nod in agreement, feel moved and inspired, and then return to exactly the same patterns you were living before. Knowledge does not automatically transform behavior. Knowledge only transforms behavior when it reaches a critical threshold of emotional intensity, when it becomes impossible to continue as you were, when the gap between what you know and how you live creates unbearable tension that must be resolved through change. So the question is, have we reached that threshold? Or will you file this information away as interesting but not urgent, important but not immediate, true but not true enough to override inertia? Only you can answer this. Only you know whether what you have heard tonight will echo in your choices tomorrow, or fade into the background noise of information you encounter but do not embody. If you are ready to act, if you have felt that shift from spectator to participant, then let me offer practical guidance. Start with a number you can sustain, not the number you think you should contribute, not the number that looks impressive, but the number that you can maintain every single month regardless of circumstances, because consistency matters more than size. $10 a month for 40 years beats $1,000 invested once. The compounding comes from repetition, from showing up again and again, from trusting the process enough to persist when results are invisible. Open an account, not tomorrow, not when you have done more research. Now, today, the moment this speech ends, because the psychological friction of starting is the highest barrier. Once the account exists, once that first contribution is made, the hardest part is over. You have crossed the threshold. You have become someone who saves. And identity, once established, tends to reinforce itself. The second contribution is easier than the first. The 12th is easier than the second. And eventually, it becomes automatic. Not because you developed superhuman discipline, but because you became a person for whom this behavior is normal. Automate everything you can. Remove the necessity of constant decisions. Set up automatic transfers on the day you receive income, before you have a chance to spend it. Make saving the default and spending the choice rather than the reverse. This is not about distrusting yourself. This is about designing your environment to align with your goals, rather than fighting your environment every single month. The people who succeed financially are not those with the strongest willpower. They are those who built systems that make good behavior effortless and bad behavior difficult. Diversify not to maximize returns, but to manage risk. Spread your investments across different asset classes, different companies, different geographies. Not because you can predict which will perform best, but because you acknowledge you cannot. Diversification is humility translated into strategy. It is the recognition that you do not know the future, and therefore should position yourself to benefit from multiple possible futures rather than betting everything on one scenario. Ignore noise. The financial media exists to generate anxiety, to convince you that action is always required, that missing this opportunity or failing to react to that crisis will doom you. But the vast majority of financial news is noise, not signal. It is entertainment disguised as information, urgency disguised as wisdom. Your best strategy is to invest consistently, ignore monthly fluctuations, and trust that productive capital compounds over decades regardless of temporary volatility. Check your portfolio quarterly if you must, but ideally less frequently. The less you look, the less tempted you will be to interfere with the process that is working on your behalf. And most importantly, live your life. Do not become so obsessed with future wealth that you sacrifice present joy. Do not deny yourself every pleasure in service of a retirement that may never come. Find the balance. Spend on what genuinely matters to you. Invest in experiences, relationships, health, growth, but eliminate spending that does not serve you, that you do only out of habit or social pressure or boredom. The goal is not to hoard money. The goal is to use money as a tool that amplifies your deepest values across time. Because here is the ultimate insight. The time value of money is really about the money value of time. It is about recognizing that time is your only irreplaceable resource, and money is simply one tool for managing that resource wisely. When you save, when you invest, when you let compound interest work on your behalf, you are buying something more valuable than anything you could purchase today. You are buying freedom, You are buying choice. You are buying the ability to spend your time in ways that matter to you rather than in ways required by economic necessity. This is what financial independence actually means. Not luxury, not consumption, but sovereignty over your own hours. The ability to say yes to work that fulfills you and no to work that depletes you. The capacity to help others, support causes, create beauty, pursue meaning. The space to be fully human rather than merely economically functional. And this gift, this gradual accumulation of freedom through consistent small choices, this is what you are giving your future self when you start saving today. You are not depriving anyone. You are not sacrificing. You are sending a message across time. I see you. I care about you. I am doing what I can, with what I have, from where I am, to make your life better. And when that future self arrives, when you become the person you are currently preparing for, you will look back at this moment, this exact moment when you chose to begin, with gratitude so profound it will bring tears to your eyes, because you will remember what it felt like to be uncertain, to be anxious about money, to feel trapped by circumstance, and you will see how far you have come, not through luck or inheritance or some dramatic windfall, but through the simple, boring, utterly miraculous power of starting and not stopping, of planting seeds and letting time transform them, of trusting a process you could not see working but continued anyway. This is the hero's journey of personal finance, not slaying dragons or conquering kingdoms, but making small, brave choices consistently over time. And the reward is not just financial, but psychological, spiritual, existential. The reward is becoming someone who keeps promises to themselves, someone who can delay gratification, someone who values the future without sacrificing the present, someone who has mastered one of the fundamental challenges of being human, the ability to act today for the sake of tomorrow. So as we close, as you prepare to re-enter the world beyond this speech, I want to leave you with one final thought. You are not alone in this. Every person who has achieved financial security walked the path you are about to walk. They started uncertain. They made mistakes. They doubted. They struggled. But they persisted. And time rewarded that persistence in ways that no other force could. You have that same time available to you. It is flowing past you right now, this very second. And the only question that matters is, what will you do with it? Will you let it carry you wherever it goes, a passive passenger in your own life? Or will you step into partnership with it, recognizing it as the greatest ally you could ever have in building the life you want to live? The choice has always been yours. It remains yours now. And whatever you decide, time will respect that decision. It will compound the consequences, positive or negative, of every action and inaction. It will multiply your choices, for better or worse, across every year you are given. And when you reach the end of your life and look back across the river of time you traveled, the question you will ask yourself is not how intelligent you were, or how lucky, or how connected, but simply, did I use the time I was given wisely? This is your chance to answer yes. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, authentically, courageously, by starting, by persisting, by trusting the process even when results are invisible, by becoming someone who sees through time rather than being trapped in moments, by recognizing that intelligence is valuable, but time is everything. The river is flowing, the moment is now, and the future you will inhabit is being shaped by the choice you are about to make. Choose wisely, choose yourself, and let time work the miracles it has always been capable of, waiting only for your permission to begin.